The wind howled across the icy plains of Kruvos 6, a planet where winter never ended. Snowstorms raged like angry spirits, covering everything in thick layers of frost. The air was so cold that even the strongest creatures struggled to survive. In the middle of this endless white desert, Riva lay curled up in the snow. Her small, thin body trembled as the freezing wind cut through her like knives. Her skin, once smooth and shimmering, was now dull and cracked from the cold. Her fingers and toes were turning a dangerous shade of blue. She knew what that meant. Frostbite. Her people, the Exilari, had left her here. She was too weak, they said. Not strong enough to survive, not worthy of their clan. It was their way. Any child born with weakness was abandoned on Kruvos 6, left to the ice. It had been this way for generations. The strong lived, and the weak were forgotten. But Riva didn't want to be forgotten. She tried to move, but her limbs were stiff. Every breath felt like ice filling her lungs. She wanted to cry, but tears would only freeze on her face. The last thing she saw before her vision blurred was the dark sky above, filled with distant stars. She wondered if anyone out there even knew she existed. Then, through the blizzard, something beeped. Miles away, Dr. Elias Carter sat inside his small outpost, staring at a blinking red light on his monitor. It was a distress signal, an automated ping from one of his medical drones that had been scanning the area for any signs of life. He frowned and leaned forward. "Impossible," he muttered. There was nothing alive on Kruvos 6 except some stubborn bacteria and the occasional scavenger beast. The signal came again. A life form detected. Weak. Near death. Elias was a field medic for the Terran Union, stationed on Kruvos 6 to monitor the effects of extreme cold on different biological systems. He had seen frozen corpses before, travelers who got lost, smugglers who underestimated the cold. But this signal was fresh. Someone was still alive out there. Without hesitation, he grabbed his thermal suit, a thick insulated jacket designed to handle extreme temperatures. He strapped on his breathing mask, checked his medical kit, and powered up his snow skiff, a small, hover-powered vehicle made for navigating rough terrain. "This better not be another ice wolf," he muttered, remembering the last time his drones mistook a frozen animal for a person. The skiff's engine hummed as he sped into the storm, guided by the drone's coordinates. Snowflakes the size of his palm slammed against his visor, but he pushed forward. The signal grew stronger. Then he saw it. A small figure, barely visible beneath the thick snow. His heart pounded. It's a kid. An alien kid. Elias jumped off his skiff and rushed forward. He brushed the snow away, revealing Riva's fragile form. Her skin, a pale shade of violet, was covered in frost. Her lips were slightly open, her breathing almost non-existent. Her fingers were curled into fists, as if she had been fighting to stay alive. "Hey, kid," Elias said, kneeling beside her. His voice was calm but urgent. "You're not dying today." He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Faint pulse. She was barely hanging on. Elias worked fast. He pulled out a thermal blanket from his kit and wrapped her in it. His gloved hands carefully checked her limbs. Her toes and fingers were stiff. Severe frostbite. If he didn't warm her up soon, she might lose them. He lifted her gently and carried her to his skiff. She was light, almost weightless in his arms. As he secured her into the passenger seat, he glanced at her face. So young. Maybe 10 or 12 in human years, though he wasn't sure how Exilari age. "What were you doing out here, kid?" he whispered. But he already knew. He had heard stories about the Exilari, a proud, ruthless species. If they thought someone was weak, they abandoned them. Monsters. Elias clenched his jaw and turned the skiff back toward his outpost. The storm was getting worse, but he didn't care. He had a life to save. Inside the warmth of the outpost, Elias worked quickly. He activated the medical scanner, analyzing her vitals. Her body temperature was dangerously low. Oxygen levels unstable. He removed her frozen clothing, replacing it with a heated medical gown. Then he wrapped her in another thermal cocoon, a high-tech sleeping bag designed to restore body heat. As the machines monitored her condition, Elias sat beside her, rubbing his tired eyes. She looked peaceful now, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Severe frostbite, possible organ damage, weak immune system. Even if he saved her, what then? Would the Xilari come looking for her? He sighed. Doesn't matter. I won't let her die. Elias wasn't like the Xilari. Humans didn't leave people behind. Not on his watch. As the storm raged outside, Elias leaned back, watching over the fragile life he had just rescued. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. This girl wasn't going to die alone. Not while a human was there to fight for her warmth. It was the first thing Riva felt when she drifted back to consciousness. The unbearable cold that had numbed her body was gone. Instead, she felt heat surrounding her, sinking into her frozen skin. Her fingers twitched slightly, but a dull pain spread through them, making her wince. Pain meant she was still alive. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The light above her was soft, glowing in a strange metal ceiling. She had never seen a room like this before. The air smelled clean, different from the icy wind she had always known. Then she heard it, a voice, deep, steady. She's stable for now. Body temperature is rising, but the frostbite is bad. Riva turned her head slightly. A human. She had seen their images before, in the stories her people told, the terrible warlike creatures who had no honor. But this one looked different. His brown hair was messy, and his face was rough with short beard stubble. His strange blue eyes were focused on a glowing screen as he checked something. His clothes were thick and layered, but not like the ceremonial armor of Xilari warriors. And he did not look like a monster. Her breathing hitched, and the human turned to look at her. Their eyes met. "Hey," he said, voice softer now. "You're awake." Riva flinched, trying to sit up, but her body refused to move. Everything felt heavy. The human raised his hands, palms open. "Easy, kid. You're safe." She stared at him, heart pounding. No Xilari had ever spoken in that tone. Gentle, patient. Was this a trick? The human pressed a button on his wrist device. A soft, translated voice echoed from a nearby speaker. "You are safe." Riva's eyes widened in shock. He could speak her language. Elias watched as the alien girl's breathing quickened. He could see the fear in her glowing purple eyes. She had every right to be scared. He had read about her species, their brutal traditions, their belief that the weak were worthless. If she had been abandoned here, it meant they had given up on her. And now she was in the hands of a human. "I know you're scared," Elias said, keeping his voice calm. He pointed to himself. "I'm Elias. Dr. Elias Carter. I found you in the snow." The girl's lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. He gestured around the room. "This is my outpost. I'm a medic. I help people." She blinked, clearly confused. Elias sighed. Of course she doesn't understand. Her people don't believe in help. He turned to the medical scanner. "Your body temperature is almost normal now, but you have severe frostbite on your hands and feet. If I hadn't found you, you would have." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You would have been lost to the cold." Her gaze flickered down to her hands, wrapped in heated bandages. She flexed her fingers slightly, then winced in pain. "Yeah, it's going to hurt for a while," Elias said. "But you're alive. That's what matters." For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, barely above a whisper, she spoke her first words. "Why?" Elias frowned. "Why what?" "Why? Save me." Her voice was raspy, weak, but the question carried weight. Elias exhaled, leaning forward. "Because that's what humans do." She stared at him, as if searching for a lie. But Elias meant every word. Hours passed, and Riva remained silent, watching Elias from a distance as he worked. He moved around the outpost, checking monitors, adjusting machines, making notes on his datapad. Every so often, he glanced at her, offering her warm drinks and soft food. She refused at first, still unsure. Then, hunger won the battle. Slowly, she reached out and took the food, a small warm nutrient bar. She sniffed it, hesitated, then took a small bite. It tasted strange but not bad. Elias grinned. See, not poisoned. Riva looked at him sharply. He chuckled. Yeah, I know how your people think. She chewed slowly, watching him with careful eyes. She had expected cruelty, or maybe indifference. But instead, the human treated her with patience, even humor. This was not what she had been told about his kind. After finishing her food, exhaustion pulled her down again. Her body was still weak, and warmth made her drowsy. As she closed her eyes, she heard Elias speaking softly. I don't know if your people are coming back for you, he admitted. But if they don't, I won't let you die here. For the first time in her life, Riva felt something new. Hope. Riva woke to the steady hum of machines. The warmth surrounding her was strange, unfamiliar. She had never known a place like this, where the air didn't bite, where the wind didn't howl like hungry spirits. Her body still ached, but she could move her fingers now, though they felt stiff and painful. She carefully lifted her hand and examined the thick bandages wrapped around her frostbitten skin. You're healing faster than I expected. She turned her head sharply. Elias was sitting nearby, leaning back in a chair, watching her with a relaxed expression. He had dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept much. In one hand, he held a steaming cup of something that smelled bitter. Pain means you're alive, he added, taking a sip from his cup. That's a good thing. Riva didn't answer. She wasn't sure what to say. Her people never spoke kindly unless they wanted something in return. She still didn't understand why this human had saved her. What did he want from her? She remembered what the elders had always said about humans. They only take. They only destroy. And yet, this one had done neither. She finally managed to speak, her voice still rough. Where am I? My outpost, Elias answered. About 30 kilometers from where I found you. You were almost frozen solid. Riva lowered her gaze. She had come so close to death, abandoned like a broken tool. A sharp pain twisted in her chest, but she quickly pushed it away. Are you hungry? Elias asked. She hesitated, but her stomach answered for her with a quiet growl. Elias smirked. I'll take that as a yes. Elias placed a bowl of hot broth in front of her. Riva stared at it. The liquid was steaming, and the smell was rich and unfamiliar. It was nothing like the raw, dry food she had eaten before. She looked at Elias warily. He sighed. Look, I get it. You don't trust me. That's fine. But you need to eat. Still, she hesitated. Elias rolled his eyes and took a big sip from the bowl. Then he smacked his lips dramatically. Mum, not poisoned. See. Riva blinked at him. Then, for the first time, a tiny flicker of amusement crossed her face. She lifted the bowl carefully and took a small sip. It was warm. For the first time in her life, she felt heat inside her. It spread through her body, chasing away the last traces of cold. She took another sip, then another, drinking faster now. Elias smiled slightly. Told you. She ignored him and focused on the food, but deep inside, something shifted. This human was different. Over the next few days, Riva grew stronger. Elias taught her how to move her stiff fingers again, how to stretch her sore muscles without damaging them. He gave her warm clothes, human clothes, soft and thick. At first, she resisted, but the warmth was too comforting to refuse. She still didn't talk much, but she listened. Elias talked to her as he worked, fixing equipment, running scans, checking weather patterns. He explained things to her, how his machines worked, why the storm outside was dangerous, what he was doing to keep them both alive. No one had ever explained things to her before. One day, as Elias repaired a broken drone, Riva finally asked, "Why are you alone?" Elias paused. He looked at her, then shrugged. "Not much need for company out here." She frowned. "Humans don't like being alone." Elias chuckled. "You've been taught a lot about humans." She hesitated, then nodded. "Well, most of it's probably wrong." She tilted her head slightly. "Then why are you here?" Elias exhaled. "Because someone has to be." She didn't understand. "My job is to help people," he explained. "Even people who don't think they need help." His blue eyes met hers. "Like you." Riva lowered her gaze, gripping the fabric of her sleeve. No one had ever wanted to help her before. She wasn't sure how to feel about it. That night, the storm outside grew stronger. The outpost walls shuddered as the wind roared, ice slamming against the metal. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Riva flinched. Elias glanced at her. "Storm's worse than usual." She hugged herself, staring at the ceiling. The sound reminded her of the night she was abandoned, left to die in the snow. "Hey." She looked up. Elias tapped a small device on the table. Music filled the room, a soft, gentle melody. It wasn't like the sharp war songs of the Xilari. It was slow, warm, comforting. Riva stared at him in confusion. "What is this?" "Music," Elias said simply. "Humans like it. Helps us feel less alone." She listened. It was strange. She didn't understand the words, but the sound soothed her. For the first time, the storm outside didn't feel so terrifying. Elias leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You should sleep. You need rest." She hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, "Thank you." Elias raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Riva didn't answer. She wasn't sure herself. But as she closed her eyes, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel completely alone. The storm outside continued for days. The wind howled like a living beast, throwing ice and snow against the metal walls of the outpost. Riva still flinched at the sound, but she no longer trembled in fear. Because now, she wasn't alone. Elias had given her a small corner of the room with blankets and a heater. It wasn't much, but it was the warmest place she had ever slept. Each night, she curled into the soft fabric, listening to the quiet hum of machines and the distant melody of human music. It was strange, but comforting. She had never imagined that warmth could exist outside of battle, that someone could offer kindness without demanding something in return. One morning, Elias placed something new in front of her. It was a glove, thick, reinforced, made of dark, flexible material. "What is this?" she asked, picking it up. Elias smirked. "A gift." She stared at him in confusion. "A gift?" "Yeah. Humans do that sometimes," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It's a heated glove. Helps with frostbite. I modified it so it'll fit your hands." She hesitated. "Why?" Elias sighed. "Because I want to. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to prove anything. It's just yours." Riva swallowed. She had never been given anything before. In the Xilari culture, gifts were a sign of weakness. Only those who couldn't survive on their own accepted help. But humans were different. Slowly, carefully, she slipped the glove onto her hand. A soft warmth spread through her fingers, and she let out a quiet breath. It felt nice. She flexed her fingers, staring at the way the fabric moved with her. It was better than any armor she had worn before. "Do you like it?" Elias asked. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. Elias grinned. "Good." As the days passed, Riva began to help around the outpost. At first, Elias didn't ask her to do anything. He worked alone, repairing equipment, checking weather reports, making sure the generators didn't fail. But Riva watched. She studied the way he worked, memorizing his movements. One day, without a word, she picked up a tool and started fixing a loose panel on the wall. Elias glanced over. "Oh, you want to help now?" She didn't answer, just kept working. Elias chuckled. "All right then." From that day on, she worked beside him. She learned how to operate human technology, how to read the strand symbols on the glowing screens, how to fix broken drones. She was a fast learner. Elias was impressed. "You've got good hands," he said one day as they repaired a heating unit. Riva looked at her bandaged fingers. Once, she had believed they were useless, too damaged to fight, too weak to hold a weapon. But here, in this outpost, she was not useless. For the first time, she felt needed. One evening, as they ate together, Riva asked a question that had been bothering her for days. "Why do humans help others?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "That's a deep question." She frowned. "The strong do not help the weak. The weak must learn to survive on their own." Elias sighed, leaning back. "That's what your people believe, huh?" She nodded. He was silent for a moment, then said, "You know, humans weren't always like this. A long time ago, we were just like your people, fighting for power, abandoning the weak. But then we realized something." "What?" "That survival isn't just about strength. It's about working together." He looked at her seriously. "We don't leave people behind, because one day we might be the ones who need saving." Riva's fingers curled into fists. Her people had left her behind. They had judged her as weak, useless. If humans had been the same, she would have died out there in the snow. But Elias had saved her, and now she was starting to understand why. That night, as the storm raged outside, Riva sat alone, thinking. She had always believed that strength was about fighting, about proving yourself in battle. But Elias had shown her a different kind of strength, one that came from helping, protecting, and building something greater than yourself. It was confusing. It was frightening. But deep inside, she felt something new, a desire to learn more. She looked at the small glove on her hand, then at the tools on the table. She made a decision. Tomorrow, she would ask Elias to teach her more. Because maybe, just maybe, there was another way to live. Riva woke up before the sun rose. The outpost was silent except for the hum of machines and the occasional beep of sensors. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving a frozen, silent world beyond the metal walls. But inside, warmth remained. She sat up slowly, flexing her fingers. The heated glove Elias had given her still fit perfectly. It felt like protection, but not in the way armor did. It wasn't meant for battle. It was meant to heal. That was something new. She turned her head slightly. Across the room, Elias was still asleep, his chair tilted back, arms crossed, soft snores escaping his lips. He looked peaceful. She had never seen a warrior sleep so carelessly before. Was it because he was weak? No. It was because he trusted. The thought unsettled her. Trust was not a thing that Siluri knew well. But Elias did. And for the first time, Riva wondered if maybe trust wasn't a weakness. When Elias finally woke, he stretched, groaning as he rubbed his tired eyes. "Morning," he mumbled, then looked over at her. "You're up early." Riva hesitated, then spoke. "I want to learn." Elias blinked. "Learn what?" She took a deep breath. "How to do what you do. How to fix things. How to help." Elias stared at her for a moment. Then a slow grin spread across his face. "All right," he said. "Let's get to work." The day was spent teaching. Elias showed Riva how to operate the medical scanner, how to check vital signs, how to understand the numbers and symbols on the screen. At first, the human technology confused her, but she caught on quickly. She learned how to clean wounds, how to apply bandages properly, how to make sure a patient was stable. "You've got a steady hand," Elias noted as she carefully wrapped a synthetic bandage around a training dummy's arm. Riva frowned. I was trained for precision in battle. Well, now you're using it for something better, Elias said. She didn't reply, but his words stuck with her. For the first time, her hands were creating instead of destroying. And it felt good. Later that evening, as they sat together eating a warm meal, Elias leaned back with a sigh. You did good today, he said. I think you've got the makings of a great medic. Riva looked down at her hands. Once they had held weapons. Now they held knowledge. I never thought I could be more than a warrior, she admitted softly. Elias smiled. There's more to life than fighting. She looked at him. For humans, maybe. For everyone, Elias corrected. Your people might not see it, but you do. That's why you're here. That's why you're learning. Riva was silent for a moment. Then, quietly, she said, I think my people were wrong. Elias didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was gentle. Maybe. Or maybe they just haven't figured it out yet. She looked at him, searching his face. His blue eyes held no mockery, no cruelty, only understanding. For the first time, Riva allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. A new path. And she was ready to take it. Days turned into weeks. Riva had learned many things in Elias's outpost. She knew how to fix broken machinery, how to treat wounds, and how to survive a freezing storm. More importantly, she had learned something even greater. Kindness did not make one weak. For the first time in her life, she felt purpose beyond just fighting. And yet, part of her still feared the future. What would happen when she left this place? What would happen if her people found her? She didn't have to wait long to find out. It started with an alert. Elias was checking the long-range scanner when a red warning flashed on the screen. Riva leaned closer. What is it? Elias frowned. Ship incoming. Military model. A cold feeling crept into Riva's chest. Xilari. Elias nodded. Looks like it. She stood up quickly, her body tense. They must be searching for me. Elias turned to her. Are you sure? She swallowed hard. She had been abandoned, left to die. It would have been a disgrace for the Xilari to return for her. And yet, if they had discovered she was alive, they might want to correct their mistake. She clenched her fists. They will not let me live. Elias exhaled sharply and grabbed his rifle. Then we make sure they don't find you. But it was too late. The scanner beeped again. The ship had already landed nearby. The outpost's external sensors picked up movement outside. Elias pulled up the security feed. On the screen, 3 armored Xilari warriors moved through the snow, their weapons ready. Riva recognized them immediately. One of them was Commander Vector, the same warrior who had left her to die. Her blood turned to ice. Elias studied the screen. They don't look like a rescue team. They're not, Riva said bitterly. They came to erase their mistake. Elias clenched his jaw. Then we need to stay quiet. If they don't know you're alive, they might leave. Riva shook her head. They will search the area. If they find this outpost, they will not leave without blood. Elias's grip on his rifle tightened. He looked at her, his voice serious. Then what do you want to do? Riva stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She had 2 choices. She could run, hide like a coward, and hope that Xilari never returned. Or she could face them. Her old self would have fought immediately, without thinking. But she was different now. Elias had taught her that violence wasn't always the answer. But this wasn't just about her anymore. If she didn't act, Elias would be in danger too, and that she could not allow. She turned to him, her voice steady. I will talk to them. Elias frowned. Are you sure? They are Xilari, she said firmly. They respect strength. If I show them I am still alive, still strong, they may reconsider. Elias hesitated, then sighed. All right. But I'm coming with you. Riva nodded. Together, they stepped outside. The wind was harsh, but the sky was clear. The Exilari warriors turned at the sound of the outpost door opening. Their eyes widened when they saw Riva. Vector stepped forward, his expression dark. Impossible. Riva stood tall. You left me to die. Vector sneered. You were weak. His gaze flicked to Elias. And now, I see you've become something worse. A traitor. Riva's hands clenched, but she forced herself to stay calm. I am not a traitor. I am alive. That is proof of my strength. Vector growled. Your survival is a mistake that must be corrected. Elias lifted his rifle slightly. I'd rethink that. The other Xilari warriors raised their weapons, but Vector held up a hand. Human, this does not concern you. Elias chuckled coldly. She's under my roof. That makes it my concern. Riva glanced at Elias, her heart tightening. He was willing to fight for her, a human. A species her people had always seen as soft, was willing to stand against warriors for her sake. That was true strength. She stepped forward, her voice strong. If you wish to challenge me, then do so. But if I win, you will leave and never return. Vector narrowed his eyes. And if you lose, then you may do as you please, she said simply. Elias tensed. Riva. She met his gaze. This is my fight. Elias exhaled sharply, but after a moment, he gave her a small nod. She turned back to Vector. Do you accept? The commander grinned. Gladly. The duel was quick. Vector was fast, but Riva was faster. She had spent weeks training her body in a new way, not just for battle, but for precision, control, and endurance. She dodged his first attack easily. His second strike was sloppy. He was overconfident. She used that against him. With a swift movement, she knocked his weapon aside, twisted behind him, and brought him to the ground. Before he could react, she pressed a blade, a small one Elias had given her for emergencies, against his throat. Vector froze. Riva leaned down, her voice calm. I am no traitor. She pulled back the blade and stepped away. Leave, and tell the others. Riva is not weak. Vector slowly got up, his face twisted in frustration, but he did not attack again. With a sharp nod to his warriors, he turned and disappeared into the snow. Elias let out a breath. Well, that was something. Riva turned to him. You did not stop me. Elias smirked. Didn't need to. You had it under control. Riva looked down at her hands. The Xilari had always said that strength was in battle, in war. But she had won this fight without spilling blood. She had proved her strength in a new way. And for the first time, she truly believed she had a choice in what kind of warrior she wanted to be. She looked at Elias and gave him a small nod. Thank you. Elias smiled. Anytime. As the Xilari ship vanished into the sky, Riva knew her past was behind her, and her future was just beginning. The Xilari ship disappeared into the sky, leaving behind only the sound of the cold wind howling across the frozen plains. Riva watched until it was completely gone. She had won. Not just the duel against Vector, but something bigger, the right to choose her own path. For the first time in her life, she was free. Elias let out a long breath and lowered his rifle. Well, that was intense. Riva turned to him. You doubted me. Elias chuckled. Not for a second. He slung his weapon over his back and smirked. Okay, maybe for half a second. Riva shook her head, but a small smile tugged at her lips. She had come to understand Elias over the past few weeks. His humor, his kindness, his way of always finding light in the darkness. It was something she had never seen among her own people, something she admired. She took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs. It's over. Elias nodded. Yeah. Riva looked at him, her expression serious. So, What happens now? Elias studied her for a moment, then shrugged. That depends. What do you want to do? The question caught her off guard. What do I want? For so long, her choices had been made for her. She had been raised to fight, trained to kill, abandoned when she was no longer useful. Now, for the first time, the path ahead was hers to decide. She looked at the outpost, at the home she had built here with Elias. She thought about what she had learned, about healing instead of hurting, about saving lives instead of taking them. Her hands clenched into fists. She could not change what she had done in the past, but she could choose what she became. She turned to Elias, her voice steady. I want to stay. Elias blinked. Stay? You mean here? At the outpost? Yes, Riva said. I want to continue learning. I want to help. Elias stared at her for a long moment. Then, a slow grin spread across his face. Well, I was kinda hoping you'd say that. Riva raised an eyebrow. Oh. Elias shrugged. You're a fast learner. And let's be honest, you make this place way more interesting. Riva smirked. Is that all? Elias chuckled. Okay, fine. You're also the best backup I could ask for. Not that I ever get into trouble, of course. Riva crossed her arms. You were nearly eaten by an ice beast last week. Elias coughed. That doesn't count. She shook her head but smiled. She had never imagined she could find friendship in a human. But here she was. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. The days passed quickly. Riva threw herself into her training. She learned more about medicine, engineering, and survival tactics. She fixed broken equipment, assisted in medical procedures, and even helped Elias upgrade the outpost's defenses. She was no longer just a warrior. She was something more. Elias had been right. Strength wasn't just about battle. It was about protecting. And she had found something worth protecting. One evening, as they sat by the heater, eating a simple meal, Elias suddenly spoke. You know, you don't have to stay here forever. Riva looked up. I thought you wanted me to stay. I do, Elias said. But you deserve to see more. There's a whole galaxy out there. Planets, cities, people. You should get to choose where you belong. Riva was silent for a moment. Then she said, I belong here. Elias studied her face. You're sure? She nodded. For now, yes. Elias grinned. Well then, I guess you're officially my assistant now. Assistant. Riva frowned. That does not sound important. Elias laughed. Fine, fine. How about co-chief of outpost operations? Riva considered for a moment, then smirked. That will do. Elias clapped his hands together. Perfect. Now, first rule as co-chief. You get to do all the boring paperwork. Riva glared at him. I take it back. Elias just laughed. As the days turned into weeks, Riva no longer thought of herself as a lost warrior. She was something new. A healer. A protector. A friend. Her people had abandoned her, believing she was weak. But they were wrong. She had found true strength, not in war, but in choosing her own path. And this was just the beginning.